In a small town tucked away in Georgia, life moved at its own unhurried pace. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved hello, kids played outside until the streetlights came on, and everyone knew each other by name, or at least their dog's name. For Maya Johnson, this little corner of the world was home. At 29 years old, she had built a simple yet meaningful life for herself and her 6-year-old son Elijah. Maya wasn't one to complain, even though life hadn't always been easy. She worked 2 jobs, early mornings at a local diner and late nights cleaning offices to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Her days were long, but they were filled with love. Elijah was her everything. His laughter brightened even her toughest days, and his big dreams reminded her why she worked so hard. On most evenings, Maya would pick Elijah up from after school, stop by the grocery store for dinner ingredients, and then head home. But tonight was different. It was already dark when Maya left work. The clock had ticked past midnight and the streets were quiet except for the hum of her car engine. She had just finished her shift cleaning an office building downtown and was eager to get back to her cozy apartment. Elijah was staying with her sister for the night, which meant Maya could finally relax. As she drove along the empty road, her mind wandered. She thought about Elijah's report card, the new recipe she wanted to try, and maybe even treating herself to a movie this weekend. Just as she started humming along to the radio, red and blue lights flashed behind her. Her heart sank. She pulled, over slowly, making sure to signal properly. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she waited for the officer to approach. Through her rearview mirror, she saw 2 police cars parked behind her, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows on the pavement. "License and registration, please," one of the officers said gruffly, shining a flashlight into her car. Maya nodded and reached carefully into her glove compartment. "Of course, officer." The second officer lingered near her window, peering inside the car as if searching for something suspicious. Maya forced herself to stay calm, though her pulse raced. This wasn't the first time she'd been pulled over unnecessarily. Over the years, she'd learned to expect it, not because she broke the law, but because of the color of her skin. "You know why we stopped you?" the first officer asked, his tone clipped. "I'm not sure," Maya replied politely. "Is there something wrong?" "Broken taillight," he said, pointing toward the back of her car. Maya glanced in her side mirror and frowned. Sure enough, one of her taillights looked dimmer than usual. She made a mental note to fix it tomorrow, but something about the situation didn't sit right. Why did they need 2 cars for a broken taillight? And why were both officers acting so tense? Before she could ask, the second officer spoke up. "Mind if we take a look inside your vehicle?" Maya blinked, caught off guard. "Why? Did I do something wrong?" "We're just doing our job, ma'am," the first officer said, his voice firm. Maya hesitated. She knew better than to argue with the police, but this felt like more than just a routine traffic stop. Still, she nodded reluctantly. "Okay, go ahead." The officers began searching her car, opening the trunk and rifling through her belongings. Maya watched helplessly as they tossed aside her gym bag, her lunchbox, and even a stack of papers she'd been carrying for work. Each item seemed to fuel their suspicion instead of easing it. "This is ridiculous," Maya muttered under her breath, clutching the steering wheel tighter. "What was that, ma'am?" the second officer snapped, glaring at her. "Nothing," Maya said quickly, forcing a neutral expression. Her mind raced. This couldn't end well. She needed someone, anyone, to step in and help her. Then it hit her. There was one person who could turn this around. One person who commanded respect wherever he went. Her dad. Taking a deep breath, Maya grabbed her phone and dialed his number. As the call connected, she prayed he'd answer. If anyone could handle this mess, it was him. When he picked up, his voice was calm but authoritative, instantly grounding her. "Hey, baby girl," he said. "What's going on?" Maya swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "Dad, I got pulled over. These cops are harassing me and I don't know what to do." Her father listened quietly, letting her explain the whole situation. When she finished, there was a brief pause before he responded. Put me on speaker, he instructed. Maya hesitated, glancing nervously at the officers. They were still rummaging through her car, oblivious to the storm brewing on the phone line. Finally, she pressed the button and held the device out toward them. "Gentlemen," her father's voice boomed, clear and commanding. "This is Colonel Hayes. I'd like to know exactly what's happening here." The effect was immediate. Both officers froze, exchanging uneasy glances. "Colonel Hayes," the first officer stammered. Sir, we're conducting a routine traffic stop." "That doesn't sound very routine," her father interrupted, his tone sharp. "Care to explain yourselves?" For the first time since the stop began, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The call that changed everything started with a shaky breath and ended with a voice so powerful it could stop a storm. Maya's fingers trembled as she held the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been more relieved to hear her father's voice. It wasn't just his presence that comforted her, it was the weight it carried. Her dad wasn't just any man. He was someone people listened to, whether they wanted to or not. When her father asked her to put him on speaker, Maya hesitated for a split second. She glanced at the two officers standing near her car, their flashlights still casting long shadows across the pavement. One of them was leaning into her back seat, rummaging through her things like he owned the place. The other stood by the driver's side door, arms crossed, watching her every move. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Are you sure about this?" His response came immediately, steady and firm. "Do it, sweetheart. Let me handle this." Maya took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She pressed the button to switch the call to speaker and held the phone out toward the officers. For a moment, there was silence. Just the sound of the wind rustling through, the trees and the distant hum of traffic. Then her father's voice filled the air, low and commanding like thunder rolling across the sky. "Gentlemen," he began, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is Colonel Hayes. I'd like to know what's going on here." The reaction was instant. Both officers froze mid-motion. The one who had been searching her back seat straightened up so fast he nearly hit his head on the roof of the car. The other uncrossed his arms and stepped back slightly, his posture stiffening. They exchanged a glance, their earlier confidence melting away like ice under the sun. Sir?" The first officer stammered, his voice suddenly less sure of itself. "We're conducting a routine traffic stop. This vehicle has a broken taillight." "That doesn't sound very routine," her father shot back, his words sharp enough to cut glass. "You've got 2 cars and 2 officers here for a broken taillight. Care to explain yourselves further?" The second officer chimed in, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Sir, we received reports of suspicious activity involving this vehicle. We're just doing our job." Maya's dad didn't miss a beat. "Suspicious activity? What kind of suspicious activity? And who reported it?" The officers looked at each other again, their discomfort growing. Neither of them seemed prepared to answer that question. Finally, the first officer cleared his throat and said, "It's standard procedure, sir. We're checking for safety reasons." Her father let out a short, humorless laugh. "Safety reasons? You mean unlawfully searching my daughter's car without probable cause? That's not safety, that's harassment. And if you don't have a solid explanation for this, then I suggest you pack it up and leave before I make some calls." The tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a knife. Maya could see the officers weighing their options. On one hand, they were used to throwing their weight around, especially when dealing with people they thought wouldn't fight back. On the other hand, they now found themselves face to face with someone who wasn't afraid to hold them accountable, and who had the power to do so. "Sir," the second officer tried again, his voice wavering. "We're just following protocol. We didn't mean any disrespect." "Respect?" her father interrupted, his tone icy. Respect would have meant pulling her over politely, issuing a warning about the taillight and letting her go. Instead, you've treated her like a criminal. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with right now? The officers shook their heads mutely. Maya couldn't help but feel a small spark of satisfaction as she watched them squirm. These were the same men who had been so quick to judge her moments ago, assuming she was guilty until proven innocent. Now, they were scrambling to cover their tracks, realizing too late that they had picked the wrong person to mess with. Her father continued, his voice unwavering. "Let me make something crystal clear. My daughter is a hard-working single mother who does everything she can to provide for her son. She deserves respect, not suspicion. If I find out that either of you has done anything illegal tonight, I will personally ensure that your careers are over. Am I understood?" "Yes, sir." Both officers replied in unison, their voices trembling. "Good," her father said, his tone softening slightly but still firm. "Now apologize to my daughter, return her belongings, and let her go. And if I hear about this happening again, we'll be having a very different conversation." Without another word, the officers scrambled to comply. They hastily gathered up Maya's things, shoving them back into her car with none of the care they had shown while tearing through them earlier. One of them muttered a quick apology, barely meeting her eyes, while the other handed her license and registration back through the window. "Thank you for your cooperation, ma'am," the first officer said, his voice laced with forced politeness. Maya nodded silently, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. As soon as they were gone, disappearing into the night with their flashing lights, she let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her father's voice came through the phone again, softer this time, but no less reassuring. "Are you okay, baby girl?" "I'm fine, Dad," she said, her voice cracking despite her best efforts to stay composed. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "You handled yourself perfectly," he told her, pride evident in his tone. "But remember this, you don't need me to stand up for yourself. You're stronger than you think." Maya smiled faintly, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. She knew her father was right, but tonight, she was grateful to have him in her corner. As she drove home, the quiet hum of the engine filling the car, Maya replayed the events in her mind. She thought about how scared she had been, how powerless she had felt, until her father's voice reminded her that she wasn't alone. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. Little did she know. This was only the beginning. Maya sat in her car, the engine idling softly as she replayed the events of the night over and over in her mind. Her hands were still trembling slightly, but the fear that had gripped her earlier was slowly giving way to something else. Anger. Not the kind of anger that made her want to lash out, but the kind that burned deep inside. A quiet determination to make sure this never happened again. As she drove home, her thoughts drifted to her father. She couldn't help but marvel at how quickly he had turned the situation around. One moment she was trapped, feeling powerless against two officers who seemed untouchable. The next, they were scrambling to apologize, their bravado crumbling under the weight of her father's authority. It wasn't just his rank or reputation that had intimidated them. It was the sheer force of his presence, even over the phone. But Maya knew there was more to her father than just his commanding voice. He was a man shaped by years of service, sacrifice, and an unshakable sense of justice. Growing up, she had always admired him, though she didn't fully understand the extent of what he did until she was older. Now, sitting alone in her car, she found herself reflecting on the stories he had shared with her over the years. The ones that painted a picture of a man who wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. Her father hadn't always been the towering figure people now respected or feared. He came from humble beginnings, raised in a small town much like the one Maya lived in now. His parents worked hard to provide for their family, instilling in him the values of discipline, respect, and resilience. From a young age, he dreamed of serving his country, inspired by stories of bravery and selflessness. When he joined the military, it wasn't just a career choice, it was a calling. Over the years, he rose through the ranks, earning a reputation as someone who could handle the toughest missions with precision and integrity. People called him the backbone of his unit, the person others turned to when things got messy. But behind the tough exterior was a man who cared deeply about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. That's why he had dedicated so much of his life to training others, teaching them not just how to fight but how to lead with honor. Maya remembered the times he would come home after long deployments, exhausted but still finding the energy, to sit with her and talk about her day. Even then she could see the toll his work took on him, the sleepless nights, the weight of responsibility, but he never let it show when it mattered most. To her, he was invincible. And tonight, hearing him step in to defend her, she realized just how much of his strength had rubbed off on her over the years. Back at her apartment, Maya parked her car and headed upstairs. The building was quiet, the kind of silence that comes after midnight when everyone is asleep. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, flipping on the light. The familiar sight of her cozy living room brought a small measure of comfort, but her mind was still racing. She grabbed a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. Her father's number was still pulled up on the screen, and she debated calling him back to thank him properly. Before she could decide, her phone buzzed. It was him. "Hey, baby girl," he said when she answered. "You home safe?" "Yeah, Dad, I'm here," she replied, her voice softening. I don't know how to thank you. You saved me tonight." He chuckled, the sound warm and reassuring. "You don't need to thank me. That's what fathers are for. But listen, we're not done yet." Maya frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious, "this can't just end with an apology and a broken taillight. What those officers did tonight wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. And if we let it slide, it'll happen. Again. To you, to someone else. We have to hold them accountable." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. Part of her wanted to leave it alone, to move on and pretend it never happened. After all, she had Elijah to think about, and the last thing she needed was more drama in her life. But another part of her, a stronger, braver part, knew her father was right. If she stayed silent, she'd be telling herself and her son that it was okay to let people treat them unfairly. And that wasn't a lesson she wanted to teach. "What do you suggest?" she asked hesitantly. "I've already made some calls," he said, his confidence unwavering. "By morning, there will be eyes on this. News outlets, community leaders. They'll know what happened tonight. And trust me, these officers won't like the attention." Maya's eyes widened. "Dad, are you sure about this? Won't it cause trouble for you?" "Trouble doesn't scare me," he said firmly. "What scares me is seeing my daughter treated like less than she is. You deserve better, Maya. So does Elijah. And if standing up means shaking things up, then so be it." Tears welled up in Maya's eyes, but she blinked them away. She had spent so many years trying to shield Elijah from the harsh realities of the world, hoping to give him a childhood free of worry. But maybe shielding wasn't the answer. Maybe teaching him to stand tall, to speak up when something wasn't right. That was the real gift she could give him. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "Let's do it. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again." Her father's smile was evident in his voice. "That's my girl. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." After hanging up, Maya leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, change was possible. Hope that she could be part of that change, not just for herself, but for others who had faced similar struggles. As she climbed into bed, her mind kept drifting to Elijah. She imagined the conversations they would have in the future, the lessons she would pass down to him. Lessons about courage, about standing up for what's right, about believing in yourself even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. And for the first time in hours, she smiled. The next morning, Maya woke up with a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her. On one hand, she felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Her father's unwavering support and the plan they had discussed gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. But on the other hand, there was a lingering nervousness, a knot in her stomach that refused to loosen. She knew what was coming: attention, scrutiny, and possibly backlash. Standing up for herself meant stepping into the spotlight, something she had always avoided. As she got ready for the day, Elijah bounded into the kitchen, his usual cheerful self. "Morning, Mom," he chirped, climbing onto a stool at the counter. "Can we have pancakes?" Maya smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Sure thing, buddy." She pulled out the ingredients and started mixing batter, all while keeping one ear tuned to the news playing softly in the background. It didn't take long before her story made headlines. Local news channels were buzzing about the incident, thanks to anonymous tips, likely from her father's network, that painted a vivid picture of what had happened the night before. Reporters described how a single mother had been unfairly targeted during a traffic stop, only to be defended by none other than a retired military commander, known for his no-nonsense approach to justice. The phrase, "broken taillight," became a rallying cry online, sparking debates about racial profiling and police misconduct. By mid-morning, Maya's phone was blowing up with notifications. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers reached out to express their support. Some shared their own stories of being harassed or mistreated by law enforcement, thanking her for speaking out. Others offered advice or simply sent words of encouragement. For someone who had spent most of her life flying under the radar, the sudden influx of messages was overwhelming, but not entirely unwelcome. Around noon, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, she found a tall man in a crisp suit standing on her porch. He introduced himself as Mr. Daniels, an attorney sent by her father to represent her. His calm demeanor and warm smile immediately put Maya at ease. "Your dad speaks very highly of you," Mr. Daniels said as he stepped inside. "He thought you might need some guidance moving forward." Maya nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude toward her father. She led Mr. Daniels to the living room where they sat down to discuss the legal options available. He explained that they could file a formal complaint against the officers involved, demanding accountability for their actions. Additionally, they could pursue a lawsuit against the department for harassment and civil rights violations. While the process would likely be lengthy and challenging, Mr. Daniels assured her that they had a strong case and plenty of public support. "We're not just fighting for you," he added gently. "We're fighting for everyone who's ever felt powerless in situations like this." Maya felt a lump rise in her throat. She had never seen herself as someone who could inspire change, but hearing Mr. Daniels frame it that way made her realize the potential impact of her decision. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated. Later that afternoon, the police chief himself showed up at her apartment. Maya answered the door cautiously, surprised to see him standing there flanked by two uniformed officers. The chief looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as he cleared his throat. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his voice strained, "I wanted to personally apologize for the events of last night. What happened was unacceptable, and I assure you that disciplinary action will be taken against the officers involved." Maya crossed her arms, studying him carefully. Part of her wanted to accept his apology and move on, but another part, the stronger part, knew better. She glanced at Mr. Daniels, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Thank you for coming," she said evenly. "But an apology isn't enough. I want accountability, not just for me, but for everyone who's been treated this way. I'm filing a lawsuit, and I expect transparency throughout the investigation." The chief visibly paled, clearly unprepared for her response. After a moment of awkward silence, he nodded stiffly. "Understood. We'll cooperate fully." When they left, Maya closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. She couldn't believe how far she had come in just 24 hours. A week ago, she would have hesitated to speak up at all. Now, she was standing her ground, refusing to back down. That evening, Elijah tugged at her sleeve as she scrolled through articles about her story online. "Mom, why are people talking about us?" he asked innocently. Maya set her phone aside and knelt down to meet his gaze. "Because sometimes people do things that aren't fair," she explained. "And when that happens, we have to stand up and say something. It's okay to use your voice, Elijah. In fact, it's important." Elijah tilted his head, thinking it over. "So you're being brave?" She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yeah, buddy. I'm trying to be." Over the next few days, the momentum continued to build. Activists organized rallies in support of Maya, drawing crowds of people eager to demand justice. Local leaders called for reforms within the police department, citing her case as evidence of systemic issues that needed addressing. Even national outlets picked up the story, amplifying her voice far beyond the small town where it all began. Through it all, Maya remained grounded. She attended community meetings, spoke at press conferences, and worked closely with Mr. Daniels to ensure her case stayed on track. Each step reinforced her belief that standing up for herself wasn't just the right thing to do, it was necessary. One evening, as she tucked Elijah into bed, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are you scared, Mom?" Maya paused, considering the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I'm also proud. Proud that we're doing something to make things better, for us and for other families like ours." Elijah yawned, snuggling deeper under the covers. "You're my hero, Mom." Her heart swelled, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "And you're mine, kiddo. Always." As she turned off the light and closed his bedroom door, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. With her father's guidance, her son's love, and the support of countless others, she knew she could face whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly unstoppable. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Maya. Between attending meetings with her lawyer, speaking at rallies, and juggling her 2 jobs, she barely had time to catch her breath. Yet despite the chaos, she felt more alive than ever before. For years, she had been content to live quietly, doing what was necessary to keep her family afloat. But now, stepping into the role of an advocate, she realized how much she had been holding back, not just from the world, but from herself. Every time she stood in front of a crowd or sat down for an interview, Maya thought about Elijah. She imagined him watching her, learning what it meant to stand up for yourself and others. She wanted him to grow up knowing that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to move forward even when you were scared. And every time she saw his proud smile, it reminded her why she couldn't give up. One evening, after a particularly long day, Maya found herself sitting on the couch with her dad. He had driven into town to check on her, bringing along a bag of groceries and a warm casserole he'd made himself. The apartment smelled like comfort food, and for the first time in days, Maya felt a sense of calm settle over her. "You're doing good work," her father said as they sipped coffee together. "I'm proud of you." Maya looked at him, her eyes softening. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done any of this without you." He waved off her gratitude with a chuckle. "You'd have figured it out eventually. You've always been stronger than you think." She smiled faintly, leaning back against the cushions. "It's funny. I never thought I'd be someone who spoke out. I guess I always thought staying quiet was safer." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes silence feels easier, but it doesn't fix anything. What you're doing now, speaking your truth, that's how change happens." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the sound of traffic drifting through the open window. Then Maya asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you think we'll actually make a difference? Or will everything go back to normal once the attention fades?" Her father set his mug down, his expression serious. "Change takes time. People get comfortable with the way things are, and shaking them out of that comfort zone isn't easy. But what you're doing matters. Every story shared, every voice raised, it chips away at the walls people build around themselves. It forces them to listen even if they don't want to." Maya nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. She knew he was right. Real change didn't happen overnight, but each step forward brought her closer to a future where no one would have to endure what she had gone through. A few days later, Maya attended a community event organized by local activists. The gathering was held in a park downtown, with rows of folding chairs set up under a canopy of trees. Families, students, and neighbors filled the space, united by a shared desire for justice. Speakers took turns sharing their experiences, each story adding another layer to the narrative of systemic inequality. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding. She scanned the crowd, taking in the sea of faces looking back at her. Some were familiar, friends, co-workers, neighbors, but many were strangers. Still, there was a sense of connection, a shared understanding that transcended individual differences. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "My name is Maya, and I'm here today because something happened to me that shouldn't happen to anyone. I was pulled over by police officers who treated me like a criminal based on nothing more than assumptions. They searched my car, questioned me aggressively, and made me feel small and powerless, all because of the color of my skin." A murmur rippled through the audience, heads nodding in agreement. Maya paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. "But I'm not here to talk about what happened to me. I'm here to talk about what happens to so many others every single day. To mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, all people who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect." She went on to share her journey since that night, the decision to file a lawsuit, the support she received from her family and community, and the importance of holding institutions accountable. Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, earning applause and cheers throughout. As she wrapped up her speech, Maya turned her focus to Elijah, who was sitting near the front with her sister. "I want my son to grow up in a world where he doesn't have to worry about being judged unfairly," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Where he can dream big and chase those dreams without fear. That's why I'm standing here today. Because if we don't fight for a better future, no one else will." The crowd erupted into applause, some people rising to their feet. Maya stepped back, overwhelmed by the response. As she returned to her seat, her sister leaned over and whispered, "You were amazing." Later that evening, as Maya tucked Elijah into bed, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mom, did you really tell all those people about us?" She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yeah, buddy, I did. And you know what? A lot of them care about making things better, for us and for other families like ours." Elijah yawned, snuggling deeper under the covers. "That's cool. Can we do pancakes tomorrow?" Maya laughed softly, kissing his cheek. "Of course. Kiddo, now get some rest." Over the next few months, the lawsuit progressed steadily. With Mr. Daniels guiding her through the process, Maya felt confident in their case. Meanwhile, public pressure mounted on the police department, forcing them to address long-standing issues within their ranks. Training programs were revamped, policies updated, and independent oversight committees established, all steps toward accountability. Through it all, Maya remained focused on her goal, creating a safer, fairer world for Elijah and others like him. She continued speaking out, using her platform to amplify marginalized voices and push for meaningful reform. Each victory, no matter how small, fueled her determination to keep going. One afternoon, as she walked home from the diner, Maya noticed a group of kids playing basketball in the park. They laughed and shouted, completely absorbed in their game. Watching them, she felt a surge of hope. These were the faces of the future, the ones who would inherit the world she was fighting to improve. For the first time in a long while, Maya allowed herself to imagine that brighter future. It wouldn't come easily, and there would still be challenges ahead. But as long as people kept standing up, speaking out, and refusing to stay silent, she believed real change was possible. And for the first time, Maya truly felt unstoppable. Months had passed since that fateful night, and Maya's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. What started as a routine traffic stop turned into a journey of resilience, courage, and advocacy, a journey that not only changed her but also inspired countless others. Now, sitting in a courtroom filled with reporters, activists, and community members, Maya felt a mix of emotions: pride, nervousness, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. The lawsuit against the police department was finally reaching its conclusion. After months of depositions, hearings, and negotiations, the judge was set to deliver a verdict. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table alongside Mr. Daniels, her lawyer, who gave her a reassuring nod. Across the room, the officers involved sat stiffly, their expressions unreadable. The air was thick with tension, every whisper echoing like thunder. When the judge entered the courtroom, everyone stood up out of respect. As he began reading the ruling, Maya held her breath, clutching the edge of the table. The words washed over her like waves. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing, accountability for misconduct, and a landmark settlement in her favor. It wasn't just about money. It was about setting a precedent. The ruling sent a clear message. Racial, profiling, and abuse of power would no longer be tolerated. As the gavel struck the bench, signaling the end of the trial, the room erupted into applause. Strangers hugged her, tears streaming down their faces, thanking her for standing up when so many others stayed silent. Maya nodded graciously, her own eyes brimming with emotion. This victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt powerless or unseen. Later that evening, Maya celebrated quietly with Elijah and her dad. They ordered pizza and watched old movies, laughing until their sides hurt. For the first time in a long while, Maya allowed herself to relax. She didn't have to think about legal strategies or media interviews or protests. Tonight was simply about family. Elijah curled up next to her on the couch, his head resting on her shoulder. "Mom, does this mean bad cops can't pick on people anymore?" Maya smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "It means we're making things better, buddy. But there's still work to do. We have to keep reminding people to treat each other fairly." He yawned, his eyelids growing heavy. "Okay. Can I help too?" "Of course," she said, kissing the top of his head. "You already are." In the weeks that followed, Maya decided to use part of the settlement to support causes close to her heart. She donated generously to organizations fighting for social justice, funding programs that provided resources for marginalized communities. She also established a scholarship fund in her late mother's name, offering financial aid to students, pursuing careers in law, activism, or public service. But perhaps the most meaningful step Maya took was becoming a mentor. She began volunteering at local schools and community centers, sharing her story with young people and encouraging them to find their voices. Whether it was speaking to a classroom of teenagers or chatting with a single mom over coffee, Maya made it her mission to remind others that they weren't alone, and that change was possible if they dared to believe in themselves. Her father watched proudly as Maya embraced her new role. Though retired, he occasionally joined her at events, offering advice or simply lending his presence. Their bond grew stronger than ever, rooted in mutual respect and admiration. He often told her how proud he was, not just of what she had accomplished, but of the person she had become. "You've always had a fire inside you," he said one afternoon as they worked together in her garden. "I'm glad you let it burn bright." Maya grinned, wiping dirt from her hands. "Thanks, Dad. You lit the match." Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, though Maya knew things would never truly go back to the way they were. She couldn't unsee the injustices she had witnessed or forget the lessons she had learned. But instead of letting those experiences weigh her down, she used them as fuel to keep moving forward. One Saturday morning, Maya took Elijah to a community event honoring grassroots activists. The park was alive with music, laughter, and the smell of barbecue wafting through the air. Booths lined the pathways, showcasing artwork, handmade crafts, and information about local nonprofits. Families gathered around, enjoying the sunshine and camaraderie. Maya stood near a stage, listening as speakers shared stories of hope and perseverance. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, her heart swelling with gratitude. Looking out at the crowd, she saw faces of all ages, races, and backgrounds, people united by a common goal. "I used to think my job was to protect my son," she began, her voice steady and warm. "And it is. But I've realized something else. My job is also to teach him how to protect others, to show him that kindness, courage, and justice matter more than anything else. She paused, glancing at Elijah, who stood nearby holding a cup of lemonade. To anyone here today who feels small or unheard, I see you, and I promise you your voice matters. Together we can build a world where no one has to face fear or injustice alone. The crowd erupted into applause, cheering loudly. Maya stepped back, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. As she returned to her seat, Elijah ran up to her, his face beaming. "Mom, you're awesome," he exclaimed, throwing his arms around her waist. She laughed, hugging him tightly. "So are you, kiddo. So are you." That night, as Maya tucked Elijah into bed, she reflected on everything that had happened. From the terrifying traffic stop to the courtroom victory, from standing on stages to mentoring young people, her journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. Yet, amidst all the challenges and triumphs, one truth remained constant. She was doing this for Elijah. "Hey, Mom?" Elijah asked sleepily as she pulled the blanket up to his chin. "Yeah, sweetheart? Can we plant flowers tomorrow?" Maya smiled, smoothing his hair. "Sure thing, buddy. Anything you want?" As she turned off the light and closed his bedroom door, Maya felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she was ready. With her family by her side and her community behind her, she knew she could face whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, Maya felt unstoppable, and she knew that together they could create a future worth dreaming about.